Welcome to Ian Cinema, your destination for endless entertainment and unforgettable movie moments. Discover exciting films, inspiring stories, and cinematic journeys across every genre. Whether you love action, drama, thrillers, or timeless favorites, there's always something waiting for you here. Sit back, enjoy the experience, and let Ian Cinema bring the magic of movies to your screen. In this video, we'll take a closer look at Sisu, also known as Sisu, Road to Revenge. We'll break down the storyline, summarize the plot, and introduce the main cast and characters. We'll also explore the film's production background, box office performance, and critical reception before sharing our overall thoughts. So, let's get started. The film opens with a narration explaining how Finland was forced to surrender part of its territory to the Soviet Union after the war, leaving many Finns displaced from their homes. Deep in the remote wilderness, former soldier Aatami Korpi is searching for gold when he finally strikes it rich. Meanwhile, a ruthless Soviet Red Army commander, Igor, is preparing to meet with a KGB officer. The officer knows that Dragunov was responsible for the murder of Aatami's family, a tragedy that transformed him into the relentless and nearly unstoppable killing machine known as Korpi. The officer offers Dragunov a generous reward if he can track down Aatami and eliminate him once and for all. After discovering the gold, Aatami begins his journey home with the treasure loaded into his truck. Along the way, Dragunov and his armed men ambush him. Confident they have the upper hand, they prepare to execute Aatami beside his vehicle. Sensing the danger, Aatami reacts with incredible speed and precision. He swiftly kills most of the enemy soldiers, even running one of them over before reversing the truck, sending the body crashing back into Dragunov's shield. After wiping out nearly all of the attackers, Aatami takes aim at Dragunov with his rifle but decides to spare him, not yet realizing who he really is. Soon after, Dragunov is joined by reinforcements arriving on motorcycles, and the pursuit continues. The bikers eventually catch up with Aatami, with one of them managing to shoot him in the shoulder. However, Aatami quickly turns the fight in his favor. One by one, the bikers are crushed, blown apart, or even beheaded as a series of brutal explosions tears through the battlefield, forcing the remaining attackers to retreat. Aatami separates the fire from the logs, giving himself enough time to cool down the truck and treat his injuries. Meanwhile, Dragunov orders his reinforcements to unleash total destruction. Several fighter planes are sent after Aatami as he gets back behind the wheel. He briefly hides in a burned-out area, but the pilots quickly begin bombing everything around him. Thinking fast, Aatami manages to bring down one of the aircraft by forcing it into the trees, clipping its wing and sending it crashing into the forest. Once the area falls silent, he continues his journey. Another fighter attacks from the edge of a cliff. Aatami narrowly avoids its gunfire, causing the pilot to lose control and fly directly toward the truck. At the last second, Aatami shoots one of the truck's support beams and slams on the brakes. The sudden movement sends several logs sliding forward, creating a makeshift ramp that launches the jet into the air before it crashes in a fiery explosion. More aircraft soon arrive, dropping bombs across the area. The explosions destroy the remaining plane and force Aatami to drive the truck off a cliff and into a river. Although the truck is lost, Aatami and his loyal dog survive. Using the floating logs, he builds a raft and eventually comes across a tank. He fills it with explosives and heads toward the Soviet border, where Dragunov and his men are waiting. By feeding fuel into the engine, he increases the tank's speed before detonating the explosives, flipping the entire vehicle over the border barrier and directly above Dragunov's position. The tank crashes through the barricade before being captured. Aatami releases his dog so it can escape safely. Dragunov orders his men to take Aatami alive and transports him aboard a train bound for Siberia, where he is brutally beaten. During the journey, Dranov visits Aatami and reveals that he was the man responsible for murdering his family. He recalls only one member of the family who stood up to him, Aatami's eldest son, who tried to protect his mother and younger brother. Dranov cruelly boasts that he cut the boy into pieces and fed him to attack dogs before insulting Aatami, calling him nothing more than an ordinary man instead of a legendary warrior people believe him to be. As the guards fall asleep, Aatami quietly steals a knife and silently kills the nearest soldier. Carefully moving through the train without alerting anyone, he eliminates the next guard by throwing an object to distract him before stabbing him. He escapes that carriage just as another soldier wakes up to the sight of dripping blood and the fallen body. In the final carriage, Aatami accidentally steps on broken glass after a soldier drops a container of powder, alerting the remaining guards. With no choice left, Aatami fights his way through the train, killing nearly every soldier in his path. Meanwhile, Dranov uncouples the train cars, leaving Aatami trapped behind. Inside the abandoned carriage, Aatami discovers a massive missile. Dranov arrives at his destination expecting payment for capturing Aatami. Instead, he betrays the KGB officer and his men, killing them all and taking the money for himself. Moments later, Aatami ignites the missile and drives it straight toward Dranov's convoy, crashing through a window before engaging his longtime enemy in one final brutal fight. Dranov proves to be a formidable opponent, eventually knocking Aatami back toward the missile. Believing he has won, he gives Aatami one last chance to surrender. However, Aatami had already removed the missile's safety mechanism. The missile suddenly launches, slamming directly into Dranov before exploding in a massive fireball. With Dranov finally defeated, Aatami crosses the border carrying the recovered wood from his old home. He presents his documents to the border guard, who recognizes him and allows him to pass. Reunited with his loyal dog, Aatami begins rebuilding his home in a new land. As he works, a group of local villagers approaches. At first, Aatami assumes they have come to attack him. Instead, one of the men simply says that he looks like he could use some help. Touched by their kindness, Aatami gratefully accepts, and together they begin rebuilding his new life. Following the events of the first film, Aatami returns to his former home on the Soviet side of the border to recover the wood needed to rebuild elsewhere. However, the ruthless Red Army commander Dranov, the man responsible for murdering Aatami's wife and Sona, is released from prison by KGB officials after they learn that Aatami has returned. Dranov assembles a squad of armed men on motorcycles and relentlessly hunts Aatami, but none of them survive. Eventually, the soldiers force Aatami off the road. Despite losing his truck, he recovers the valuable wood and makes one final attempt to cross the Soviet border by launching a tank over the barrier. Although the tank is destroyed, Dranov captures him and places him aboard a train headed for Siberia. After revealing his identity and having Aatami tortured, Dranov unknowingly fuels his enemy's desire for revenge. Aatami escapes, kills most of the Soviet soldiers, and drives a missile into one final showdown with Dranov. After an intense hand-to-hand battle, the missile crashes into Dranov, ending his reign of terror in spectacular fashion. Sisu, Road to Revenge is an action-packed sequel to the 2022 film Sisu. Interestingly, the filmmakers chose not to include the number 2 in the title. Some of my friends who watched the trailer didn't even realize it was a sequel, which was probably a smart marketing decision. This sequel follows an old-school, standalone approach, meaning you don't need to watch the first film to understand or enjoy it. You can jump right into the story without feeling lost. That said, if you end up liking either movie, I definitely recommend watching the other. They complement each other well. The series itself is refreshingly straightforward. At the center is Aatami Korpi, a battle-hardened ex-commando whose greatest strength isn't his superpower, it's his relentless determination. He refuses to surrender, no matter how impossible the odds. Time and again, he goes through absolute hell, only to climb back out and keep fighting. Anyone who dares stand in his way ultimately meets a brutal end. The first Sisu was already a clever and expertly crafted action film that could have succeeded in any era. It simply arrived at a time when audiences especially enjoyed watching Nazis get exactly what they deserved. Set during the final days of World War II, the story follows a group of retreating Nazis attempting to steal the gold Aatami has discovered, only to be hunted down and mercilessly eliminated one by one. In the fourth chapter of the story, we learn more about Aatami's past. During the Winter War, he became a legendary Finnish commander after losing his family. His grief transformed him into a nearly mythical one-man army, feared for reportedly killing more than 300 Soviet soldiers. In Sisu, Road to Revenge, Aatami is given an unexpected opportunity to finally avenge his family while pursuing a single goal he refuses to abandon. He crosses the border into the part of Finland that was annexed by the Soviet Union and returns to the remains of his old home. Rather than leaving it behind, he carefully dismantles his cabin, loading each wooden plank onto his truck. I actually hoped he would take the entire house with him instead of abandoning it, and surprisingly, the movie delivered exactly that. His journey begins as a simple trip back to Finland and not a quest for revenge. However, the Soviet authorities quickly learn about Aatami's return. A high-ranking official travels to a Siberian prison to release the infamous war criminal Igor, the man responsible for murdering Aatami's son with a shovel. Believing only Igor can stop the unstoppable soldier he helped create, they offer him his freedom in exchange for killing Aatami. Writer-director Jalmari Helander once again wears his influences proudly. The Rambo films remain a clear inspiration, with Aatami serving as a darker, more ruthless version of the legendary action hero. At its heart, though, this is also a road movie. George Miller's influence, especially Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior, is impossible to miss. Soviet soldiers race across the landscape on motorcycles wearing intimidating, mask-like helmets while armed with flamethrowers and Molotov cocktails. They even climb onto moving vehicles in spectacular fashion. One of my favorite details is that Aatami isn't just trying to survive, he's also determined to protect every piece of his old home. When his truck is destroyed, he refuses to give up. Instead, he cleverly transforms the wooden planks into a raft before later using parts of the wreckage to build a ramp that launches a truck directly into an attacking aircraft. It's the kind of outrageous action sequence that embraces the over-the-top physics of Fast Furious or The Transporter, but does it in a far more entertaining way. I also sensed a touch of Steven Spielberg in the film's structure. Aatami constantly encounters new obstacles and has to improvise his way through each one. Everything that can go wrong usually does, yet he always gets back on his feet, silently figuring out his next move. Unlike Indiana Jones, however, Aatami resembles characters like Rambo or John McClane. He accomplishes incredible feats, but never without paying a painful physical price. Every victory comes with broken bones, injuries, and immense suffering. There are even moments that feel like direct nods to Die Hard, with Aatami forcing himself to keep moving despite devastating wounds. This is a genuinely international action film that proudly embraces its Finnish identity. Helander reunites with the same cinematographer, editor, and production designer from the first movie, creating another visually striking experience. The villains are wonderfully unhinged, and hearing them speak with thick Russian accents only adds to the atmosphere. More importantly, we've already seen Lang's intimidating presence in films like John Wick, Chapter 2, Nobody, and Sisu, making him an ideal opponent for this particular hero. I honestly can't think of anyone better suited. If there's ever another sequel, though, it might be fun to see Aatami take on an absurdly fit younger action star just to remind older audiences that experience can still beat youth. Sisu, Road to Revenge combines so many of my favorite elements of action cinema. Aatami's silent determination gives the character incredible presence, while Giuseppe currency and Chuelma's currency and Pilcroel currency's score perfectly complements the action. The brutal way Aatami dispatches his enemies often feels closer to a slasher film than a traditional war movie. The story itself is elegantly simple, Much like the best classic westerns and action films, every weapon, vehicle, and improvised tool is used in creative, often ridiculous ways that somehow remain incredibly satisfying. Many action movies with these qualities are entertaining in the moment but quickly fade from memory. I don't think that's the case here. Helander finds a way to end the story on a genuinely emotional note, giving the entire journey unexpected weight. I won't spoil the details, but it's an ending that stays with you. Helander has said in interviews that this film works perfectly as the conclusion to Aatami's story. At the same time, he also has ideas for a third installment if the opportunity arises. Personally, I'd be happy with either outcome. More than anything, I'm just glad he's continuing to make films at a steady pace because he seems to be on an incredible creative streak. What surprised me most was that, of all action movies, this one managed to genuinely move me emotionally. After everything Aatami has endured, he finally returns home and begins rebuilding his cabin. Then a group of men carrying axes and hammers approaches. Like me, you'll probably think another fight is about to begin. The music swells, the tension rises. But what happens next is far more meaningful than another battle. So he grabbed his and he gives his eggs. "We thought you could use some help." One of Fathom says those are not weapon Tappy brought. "They are tools of course," but the way Atom chokes up and the guy tells him he does not need to say anything. "Man, that attaches my heartstring to a motorized reel and it thanks him." Even the legend, the immortal, the finishy, the Baba Yaga, the guy who simply can't because he refuses turn out to hear feelings underneath. He had to Althea entirely by himself, and the idea that somebody would actually do something nice for him, that he could have some help just over him. They know that he could use it and so could never articulate. Music. It in the photos during the end credit. We even see him having a love while they were building. Music. He made friends he enjoyed. A joke? Maybe untold one. I have that for him. And I think again this is a good Rambo parallel because it's a little like the structure that makes First Blood such a classic. Rambo goes through all that and gently breaks on ball bearing into clonal, and we find out what's been going through his mind the whole time. Music. Amy would never do that but has a just as broken and emotionally repressed Ida as Rainbow and is just as powerful when it come out. It's a movie about fun, a way to kill terrible people, but it's also so much more. The best part about Sisu was its no-nonsense approach. A thrilling action movie that did not indulge in unnecessary subplot resulting in an underline-inducing glory-punching music. A sequel to Remains maintain the Sammy approach. This time the protagonist Aatami Korpi takes on the Red Army. Music. Aatami killed 3 Soviet soldiers in a venture war single-handed to seek revenge for the Tofa's family, and he had become a legend 2 years after his gold discovery. Sisu embarked on a journey to his family house in Kalia. He also left here with his wife and 2 sons. Before he were brutally murdered by a Soviet soldier. Since in 1944 while landing given up to his survey decided to travel home. This venture Thea houses would be built and rebuilt to somewhere safe, but soon after Tommy crossed the border. Aatami was heading to Finland when his part was blocked by a Soviet army. He figured that it would cause trouble any moment he noticed Thea Molotov cocktail in the hand of only of his soldier. He knew he had to act immediately. Aatami cleverly managed to take down all the soldier, but he spared Igor because he did not wish to cause harm to someone who did not try to actively shoot him down. Aatami had no idea that the man he spared was the only who would be recklessly killed his family. Igor had a fair idea of the man he was dealing with. He realized that taking down Aatami would not be an easy task, but he was ready for the challenge. He goes instructed the soldier on motorcycle and even pilot to take down Naughty. Music. He was being attacked from outside just as he was done killing the motorcyclist. He had no final solution to protect himself from the airplane. They pretty sure it were fired and he ended up taking a shelter in a burn. He figured there was no way he could protect himself there. So he goes to Heat and Road again. Buddha navigating the road with the airplane constantly targeting him was not easy, and he ended up driving his truck into a lake. It was almost about to drone Buddha. Then he released his dogs and used Thema as a makeshift drift store on the water. As he was sailing by, he stumbled upon his abandoned tank. Aatami loaded the gloss onto the tank and he was dynamo capsule his way to the Soviet camp. Buddha, unfortunately his plan did not pan out in the way he would be intended. The tanker was destroyed due to the impact and Aatami was left terribly injured. He had no choice left but to surrender. Buddha, after stepping out of the tank, he had pushed a sharp knife bled into his leg. As expected, A was repeatedly. He was hung from the ceiling of a train wagon like fresh made in a hot iron whilst they used to be repeatedly strike him. He was bleeding from his whole body when he stepped in. He realizes Tommy had extreme tolerance for physical judgment, but the one thing that completely destroyed him was the murder of his family. So I go and intentionally spared out exactly how brutality he would be killed at Tommy's wife and son. He added to his elder son Ojava was feckin' brave and he remembered a little boy because he had attempted to attack in the IE out of nowhere, tried to put up a fire to protect his mother and younger siblings until his dying breath. God looked at Tommy in his eyes and promised to put out the fire in him. He believed that Tommy was a hypertrophy section and he promised to end the legend around him, turn him onto a piece of flesh without any memory and use the logs of his house for relatoys. Music. Hey, I got it now. That everything he would be sad and it to fuel to define. As soon as I left, Aatami guarded all his attention and fury to he free himself from the irony soup, and he succeeded the soldier at the stations outside the wagon where Aatami was logged up a load. They were frightened when he saw through the small window that Tommy had freed himself. One of them decided to step in his track, and where you can already guess with what happened to the soldier. Aatami was unstoppable. The soldier we had gone in the jack on Aatami had assumed that he would do not know to have any weapon, but he had no idea what he was dealing with. At son pulled the knife blood out of the flesh and held at his clothes while walking from and towed. He tried to move his silently because he did not want to create chores before he reached his struggle. Aatami tried his best to be quiet, but it was a couple of soldier has to relieve himself and Aatami has choices but to kill them. Undoubtedly he could have killed out a soldier only to train with these, but he was an honorable man and he did not want to pull Bill's blood for the sake of music. In the sequel, there was a few moments of raw humor, such as when Aatami was walking on top of the train and suddenly a cheek pipe flew in his direction and ended up failing into only of the weapon that was full of Soviet soldier. They tried to shoot him down, but we are talking about an invisibly man flew by, but the rage of is no way one can stop him. Aatami grabbed hold of the machine guns and fired repeatedly until the wagon went completely silent. Agura was in the wagon next to the one Aatami was in. He heard the gunshot and immediately realized that it must be him. I figured that the legend around him was indeed true, and the only way to escape his fate was to unsew the gobbling at me's Igors began take off. And while he was frustrated at first, he soon noticed the beak right inside him. He immediately decided to use it as a quick fix or booster to catch up with Igor. Now I figured there was no way he could stop Aatami, but he also had his eyes on the money he was promised by his KGB handler. So immediately after disjointing the coupling, he showed a KGB agent he was dealing with. His handler offered him the money he was promised, hoping that would be enough for Igor to let go for him. But he got close him as nonetheless. Just when I thought he had made the best out of the situation, Aatami came flying in. Aatami used his bare hand to repeatedly bumble, but then again he was wounded and not in his physically bad form. I overpowered him and struck him repeatedly. During Sisu ending music, I grabbed a hold of a shovel and used it to set Tommy. He intentionally did so since his Uzi was to travel to get rid of Tommy's family as well. Now the missile was still secure to the base after it was already ignited. Igor did not realize that Aatami's in a plan. He assumed that was over 40 man who refuses to die. Music. In the end, when I asked Aatami if he had any last word, he simply spread out a sacco from his mood. Igor finally connected the doors, and by the time he realizes that Igor had released the missile, it was already too late to escape. Igor made an attempt to run, and for a second the mishap right in front of his face, and he briefly thought either maybe it was not his day to die yet, but he was proved wrong. The missile ultimately consumed Igor, and a Vegana exploded, creating grapple in all surrounding area. Aatami, understanding, finally returned home to Finland. He was in a bloody state, but he still managed to carry the logs to Roger. When he handed his passport to the water soldier, they saluted him as soon as they read his name. Aatami was a national hero, and he would be finally returned to the place where he could spend the rest of his life in peace. AM says so. Ending, we learn that Aatami Sanda started with his dream project of building his house. He did not have his family by his side, but at least a house would signify that he were finally in a safe place and soul could rest in peace. Also, for everything that Du has been through, Aatami's fusive pal managed to survive, and he continued to be the brave man's only true companion. Aatami was busy building the house when a group of men approached him. He instinctively assumed that he had arrived to cause him harm. But when only of men stated that they wanted to help him build his house, he was moved. He has spent such a brutal and really existence that a certain kindness and a genuine respect surprise him. Perhaps in the moment Thomas felt relieved in knowing that it was some good left in the world, and also he did not have his own sons around to help him building the house. The men in the community showed up and spotted him, while he had always preferred living by himself. The final scene suggested that sometime even a legendary man like Aatami Korpi would appreciate some help and support of his community. 2 years after gold discovery, Sisu embarked on a journey to his family house in Karelia. He also left there with his wife and his son before they were brutally murdered by Soviet soldiers since in 1944. Adam's family was brutally murdered by Igor Adranov. Their bodies were dismembered with a straw, and they were later fed to be homeless and stray dogs. Igor was held in prison in the Siberia, and he was released under the condition that he disagreed and affected the reputation of the Soviet army. He had to act immediately. Aatami cleverly managed to take down all the soldier, but he spared the go because he did not wish to cause harm to someone who did not try to actively shoot him down. Aatami had no worry that the man he spared was the only who would be ruthlessly killed his family. I had a fair idea of the man he was dealing with. He realizes taking down I promise would not be an easy task, but he was ready for the challenge. Igor trusted and trusted a soldier on motorcycle and even pilot to take down. He was being attacked from our side. Just as he was done killing the motorcyclist, he had to find a solution to protect himself from the airplane. Repaired, and he ended up taking soldier in a bird. Figured was made so he could protect himself there. So he rode again. As he was sailing by, he stumbled upon an abandoned tank. Aatami loaded the logs into the tank and used the animate landmine and to somehow cop his way into a Soviet camp, but unfortunately his plan did not pan out in the way he would be intended. The tank was destroyed due to the impact, and Thomas was left terribly injured. He had no choices left but to surrender. But before stepping out of the tank, he had to push the sharp knife blade into his leg. As expected, it was repeatedly he was hung for the ceiling of a train wagon. Music, like fresh made in a hot iron, was used repeatedly strike him. He was bleeding from his old body when he stepped in. Hill realizes Aatami's an extreme tolerance for physics surgery. But one thing that completely destroyed him was an merger of his family. So Igor internationally spared out exactly how brutality he would be killed at his wife and son. He added his son elder Sona was facing and brave, and he remembered a little boy because he had attempted to attack the gore in the out of nowhere. Music. He'll try to put up a fight to protect his mother and younger sibling. In 2022, the Finnish and JI action movies Sisu had a look of only a hit wonder paying a greaser prospected and a gent platform of necessary director Jalmari Helander. He did a lesson of George Muller's Mad Max Fury wrote down principally that there is a serious value in going pit to the matter long a single sate narrative lines at a profitable sleeper. He knows this choice see a follow-up which some if follow somehow feels more expensive via while still joking in under 90s minutes. So having seen of this SS indomitable hero Aatami gains our tragic backstory. Antonia Vicious post wherein that named Rada army non-necessary obstacles have been replaced between the odds and good time. At movie we got one scene of Aatami dismantling his family home beam by beam and one scene of Drav being subbed from a jail before the parent in the backroad of Soviet-occupied Fland. A linear Hasa the voice of a kid playing war game in the woods. You half expect someone's moment to call everybody in 40. It may be cartoonish look sharp or regrettably misplaced, but the comic's a similar simplicity serves as a rebook to not your blockbuster. You don't need excessive get practical special effect as potentially compelling as to blood a different face as a griefer. Meanwhile offer one grace note after another those beams become a memento than a life rather than a new beginning. Like his photo holds on to the essential torches the rest and goes harder and faster for it. His film showed raising a huge sweet and indeed everywhere else. Sisu Road event is out in 20 November in Australia and 21st of November in UK and the US. This article was amended on 21 November 2025. An earlier version suggested the movie was filmed in Finland. However, it was a short in the Estonia. Sisu Road Revenge is a brutal action movie that purposefully goes for a lane. Music. And a mean execution, but that does not mean there is not a deeper story going on in the surface. The sequel 2022 says so. It brings back the finished Aatami known to the public as the Immortal for his exceptional battlefield. The film focuses on his effort to bring the house he had with his family back into the finished Terra, which catches the attention of his Soviet Union reunion. What follows an action movie that goes back unfold from a drag darkly hilarious to jaw-droppingly a beautiful white exploring a story about trauma and loss. This Road to Revenge is a veiled exclusion of the first film pitting Korpi and GI's Russian's equivalent and surely revealing just how personal their font is. Drag now is quickly established as a former agent of the Soviet Union whose previous the cross finally killed Kontrasta innocent. This include Korpi's family, reasoning that Dranov is the only person alive who can contend with the Immortal. The Soviet leadership frees him for prison and set him before a Scorpio. Much of the film's no Scorpios attempted to reach the Finnish border with the remains of his family home, while Sisu benefited from a stance game of cat and mouse between the Corp and a Nazi soldier who encountered him. Sisu is far more rooted in a person conflict and now is found in a direct contrast to Korp, with both men having similar skill set and disagreement for their enemies. Both men seem to have a similar perspective on killing in the moment but deal with the memory of direction very differently. Drag now back to copy that is a dream of his victim planned together, and the character is portrayed as an almost cartoonishly a black and white villain. However, it's a somewhat similar to copies on this Sisu guarded for his enemies. However, World Dyer now takes some pride in his work and seek to break the Immortal portrayal of it. Korp is shown to be haunted by this pasta in the film's final moment, even people coming to help him. His horse initially come across as a threat. Korp is visibly taken away when he does not have to fight a man and is almost here when to help. This is a clear display of the lingering humanity that gives copy to the memory of his family as something played with slightly in the first room but become more pronounced in the final moment of Road to Revenge. Sisu Road to Revenge is a fairly self-contained story concluding with Korpi envisioning his family by killing Dranov before completing his journey home. The films end with the Korpi reconstructing his family home in Finnish land with a job of help of the local. In short, Korpi could be drawn into the further conflict with the Soviets, especially if his action in terror tribe were considered an act of the aggression by the army. The Finnish government could recreate Korpi of adventure, or even just an innocent civilian could call upon him for help. As for this writing, the future of Korpi is up in the air. Audi Films writer-director Helander and star Jalmari Music have expressed interest in a potential CH film, but there is no concrete plan for a follow-up. The ending of Sisu Road to Revenge reflect this. The final shot of the film framed-like photograph of Korpi and his new Finnish neighbors building the house could be seen as an induction in JoJo community. This could give Korpi plenty of reasons to defend it on his people, setting up easy narrative part for a third film. Conversely, the pictures could be taken as a final epilogue, for the character proved that he was able to put on his ripples and take off Joel to rebuild the family home, given his endurance after the loss of his family and the pain of his battle. Sisu Road to Revenge is a fairly straightforward story about a man trying to move a building from Russia to Finland. Music, and a lot of challenges to his culture along the way. However, it's very much a movie that recorded with the unintended legacy and lingering drama. Korpi is a killing machine, but he is also haunted by the memories of the family. He lost and struggled after constantly having to fight for his life, dragging the Soviet war to break the illusion of immortal, hoping to turn his unexpected religionary status into Onia has set out their own control by breaking him. Korpi's fury over his family's fate give him that is already some truly ridiculous thing, but it's also left him a quiet shell of a man who barely says a word across to him. Even his new neighbors recognizes him, acknowledging that he can't speak to his trauma even as he recognizes it and wanted to help. Rod is a ridiculous action movie, however is also a movie where about a man who has to keep moving as slowing down will cause him the loss of his older family. It's a movie about the extreme land. Someone will go to forbode ignorance and pieces and gives his sorrow to revenge a quite emotional core. The most brutal Nazis killing franchise of the past few years is back with the Sisu Road to Revenge, is changing up his story structure this time around, once again written and directed by Jalmari Helander. The action sequel pick up 2 years after its acclaimed predecessor, with Jorma Tommila returning to his home. German eliminated by the brutal killing of his family during World War II at the hands of Soviet Red Army. Officer Igor Drag, now played by the Avatar Stefan Lang, looking to start his family in a new daddy war is ending at home. Business mental his home and loads a dollar onto a truck, driving excess Finland to find a peaceful new home to honor his family memory. However, in an effort to kill the legend of a man who refuses to die, the should be released to Dragon and give him near endless resources to hunt. Thus he saw a protagonist on, resulting in an explosive race across the country, having originally premiered at a Fantastica Offensive say September 2025. Sisu Road to Revenge has guaranteed a nation whistle second for Critica, currently holding a 96% approval rating from critics on Rotten Tomatoes, who have praised a sequel for its inventive action and dark sense of humor. The movie has also gotten off to a strong start at a box office, with his final land premiere, grossing nearly $2 million against the $12 million production budget, while also being on track for a $3 million debut in its domestic opening weekend. Ahead of the movie's US release, Sim Grande Hermans interviewed Jalmari Helander and Stefan Lang to discuss Sisu Road to Me, looking at the difference between the two movies, the structure in which the first could be a camper to joy in the idea that Estanis are trying to transport his home to a hostile data, create actions any moment, like an road movie with a lot of action. Music. It's entertaining to watch but will slow to a shoot when you have a lot of moving a vehicle, cars, motorbikes, etc. And also all the cameras are moving. It is very time consuming and hard to stress for a new music. tech as the scale increased between the two films and Helander had a bigger budget to work with. The writer-director pointed to the big explosion as being the most exciting set pieces to put together, and Willie setting the toast as being the moment of all the vehicle describing putting it together. The former Helen say the key to pulling them off a lot of planning and work beforehand, especially given the tone of them how to shoot. We only have one trick and therefore have to hope that everything goes as planned. Another key evolution in Sisu road to re-stories, unlike many other action franchise. The sequel gives more insight into why Aatami's backstory regarding his family music, and a person behind it explain the daycare of this change came from his portal getting his house back, feeling it to be so original, emotional and right from the first to second. I tend to have an idea that it would match the first film and could have better to justify the film. This time is more personal and emotional and it cares good action. Second, the films was premierly finished and again you brought joint scope a bite here with the Stefan Blank in the shirt break to a fantastic actor as your primary villain. Added your more international casting came about and what should draw you to see those two in particular. I was thinking about someone's younger Buddha when your idea came to have Stefan slang. I immediately thought it was a great idea. Music. And when I had my first conversation with him it just felt pure. It was also to get big and link for us Sisu because Aatami Korpi really needed some badass actor for this film. Stefan, obviously you are no such stronger playing villain, but every actor has a different way of getting into theory villain red, whether it's a physical team, whether it's their backstory. Music, whether it's the voice. What did you find it was the best way to get into Aatami the film? As I recall it had a lot to do with the kind of empowering myself out. I was really looking to create a void music in my own self, and one of the ways I achieved that I didn't enjoy. You mentioned her backstory, and obviously the backstory of a god drag is not relevant to the narrative. Music. In a sense, but it is irrelevant to my playing the role. So to be able to create a character who is capable of such gallows good and systematic evil, it's helpful to understand where that's coming from and how that came about. Once you realize that this is gas and has been formed the moment of his birth, a child of the state, a child of state that actually form a very early age. Well, that journey really make it all the more reserved once we got to later point in a film. Ingo gets more involved in the action, especially when we finally get to see him and Aatami go on each other. I would love you to hear when it was like when you and your family got to actually share a green jump and both mentally and physically go joy to die with each other. It was a prayer because he's a terrific pro. I think we bought even without ever saying it. Music. And a contract to look out for each other, because if you think about it, we are talking about the train, we are in an enclosed space there and everything is broken and trusted, there are shed or sharp edges and everything. Wherever you go there's a dozen ways to dang yourself and hide yourself. That's interesting because that create a little bit of what your ascension, which I think is good, but working with him, we worked well together. It was a fine dude. Whenever we did go together, a lot of pences were thrown. Music. A lot of folks were stabbed into a pimply and both of us walked away from it feeling like we would done our job, and also we did not bust it, broke my hands. Music. Either our owner or acting a partner. I also loved his own stab. Aya wanted to touch on the ego because Aya was gratefully surprised by the sheer brutality with the combination of Thea impelling him and blowing him up for many of a legendary if you give him more crafting to script. I always thought you would die with a missile because that was the first idea with a music train. I thought how cool it would be to ride on a train moving with a rocket in the Bigo missile. So when he had an I would see it of him safer laying explosive ending in his road to revenge has been unpackaged by director Jalmari Helander. Wasa explained moment lying portrays a Golda Draga Soviet officer who killed Aatami's Jorma family, serving as the sequel's central antagonist Ascension, with Igor getting blown up by a ballistic missile on a train. Atomica activated this in an interview with the Green RS Grant. Here's 42nd installment. Rand explained as reason behind and Langa getting blown up with a missile, and Sisu wrote to the director stated he that was the first idea thought for the train-centered scene, making it inevitable that he would be killed in such a manner. What Helander had to say below. Speaking of Ego's dad, I was gleefully surprised by his sheer brutality. Music after with the combination of Thea warhead impelling him and blowing him up. How many tradition of a dead you would give him when crafting the crypt? I always know he would die with Thea missile because that was the first idea with the train. I thought how cool it would be to try on train moving with a rocket in a big missile. So when I heard that, I know the missile would be Thea seed of him. The train sequences was the biggest element of Sisu Road Dorito Revenge is ending with Tommy originally using the missile as a booster to catch up to fling a pair fight with Lang's character, almost the protagonist. Music. Luckily the missile is still armed, killing Igor and allowing Aatami to go back to Finland. Music. His Revenge satisfied review for Sisu Road Revenge have emphasized the major amount of violence in the sequel. This included a number of creative dead scenes for a numerous character, mostly Candace. Aatami attempt to go a good Thea antagonist, however, had the most furious data fall befitting a high-octane rotary. Revenge holds a 96% rating in Rotten Tomatoes from critics, as of writing the readily available praise of the film section seen as what make it stand out among other in designer hell status a miscellaneous idea for the trend scene. The grand action film won't be the only villain a role Lang has in the movies this year, given how memorable six or major a villain that is clear, and the dream behind the movie have an icing plot yet is satisfying that scene it makes stand out in the market while also delivering on a fitting conclusion for the second chapter of Atomic Story. A slipper Hida in 2022, Jalmari Helander Sisu was a cartoonishly down and dirty underlinear rush for action fans. No, not like the old Keo Max decades earlier. Thea a particular comparison grown. Music. Even a more valorous revenge in which German seemingly a likable protagonist must battle honorably bad guys at high speed on various form of transport is not unnecessarily better, and the larger scale sequel almost imitably lacks some of the freshness that made the original such a kick. Still, the director's undeniable flair for gleefully excessive mayhem and a proposively pacing will more satisfy those who loves his predecessor. Ida comparatively lean. Music. Mean Progressive feels particularly welcome after so many descents again writes that it delivered for less punch at much greater length and expense. Last time around the communist fine army commander Aatami Korpi only went to left alone as Vardauna finding gold in the lab plan awakened to the greed of departing Nazi forces with a zero idea who were messing with the only a man that scared already claimed Manya unfound Russian life after Soviet forces killed his family during the brief bout to brute, this time the terrifyingly fit 16A something protagonist. Music. Isa encountered in 1946, the global conflict officially well over, and he is driving in a huge truck to his old home, which thanks to redrawn brothers now lies in Russian territory. He intended to dismantle then resemble it in what remains of Finland. Music. But Soviet authorities have not forgotten that his legend snuffed out more than 300 Ada troops. Red Army officer Igor Dranov is released from a Siberian prison where he is being held for committing an honorably needless water by a casually big week to ensure Tommy never sees Finnish soil again. The two adversaries are uniquely matched, and a Korpi knows the utter brutality murdered his wife and music a son. While Dagna won't feel he's a truly completed job until the father is dead too. This setup takes about 10 minutes, after which it's one dynamic surfaces after another. Aatami managed to escape an initial roadblock home and be then attacked by the motorcyclist, followed by fighter plane with a machine gun. After a brief aquatic interlude, there is a portrait climax abroad, a train is speeding back to Siberia bearing a marriage-armed Soviet Lasani blooded sheer prisoner. Needless to say, the seal odds are stacked, and guess a poor Rycia that is divided into the 6 titly chapter. These episodes are mostly acts and mouse staging stunt work, and occasionally the violence comes so thick we are not quite sure that just happened. Anyone within these suspended to this brief bronze established a few hair era breath escapar precarious notably Olnia where Aatami make it timid era acrobatics truly past the barrier entertaining as it is such craziness ice not so well spotted by a thread of black comedies as within wasn't fast so you can also argue there's a bite too much of devailing on general likeness here he as a mailman in the front seemed to be frequently digging bullet another object out of his flesh spending pretty much the last half hour blooding in a boxer short a midner better. Appear noted to bother him, in the slightest but Turner retains a degree of philanty humor. Even as warm despite never getting so much as a word to speak. Lang's exploitatively rail speech comprises most of the dialogue. If Dragnev is not the most distinctive villain role. Music. He ever as he shows well receiving a particularly explosive exist also reward. Break spot is brief while latter cast memorable provide no more than Koyana and photo. The Kenny performers playing at the protagonist is the Jerry Bulla disappear for quite some time in Oni among several manner of his plot Holina the Highlander that is the best dystopia ever short largely as Tony Sis wrote to the revenge rather than the integrating it in the most suspect from Mazamas a wider screen cinematography to the physical design contribution of the fairly Senate action bomb verso Fajoti Sapentimis originally Scaria gets some flavor via passage of throw a singing and spectator finish writer director Jalmari Helander Sisu 2022 Sajan World War II in action or the play John Wick by way of the bastard Balancia is the narrative shredness with Thea generally blood aiding it's a kind of fail movie where the main character Jamie McKee survives any underwater assault by isolating a Nazis rod embedding through his windpipe. Sisu's cartoonish violence animated by some cheaper than they work look visual effect made a movie slight might be movie designed for cult status on room was a fear to come yet entire films Highlanders for violent spectral eventually reach the point where it all become noise to say it's equal to cleaner means to revenge to scale things back would be wrong Buddha Helanders does boil his recipe onto the essential allowing the vision's world building to ever parade any technical proficiency far shows of taken Rovenisa follow-up so lawlessly efficient that it cannot even budget to give it a card lead character a proper name Roto a revenge picks up 2 years after the original word has ended in Aatami the so-called Onaman death seeker is on a road onto his homeland of earlier now occupied by the Soviet Union with his trusty terror in the passenger seat. Aatami drives he flat across the desolate finished countryside before crossing the border into any MENA territory. There are fewer sane men on the side of the road. Music. These days but there plenty of danger as a Red Army fortifiers no domination. His mission is to demistress family a cottage log by log loaded Arlumbra into the truck and find a quiet plow to rebuild. His presence at the border allow a force mention I am named JBA officer currently as stationed at a Siberian prison while most if not all of the window dressing from the first movie a goal prospecting any female character rise left for the vulture at infamy as a Onaman Soviet killing machine has no legend has it that once killed hundred of Soviet and even the war is over Thea would like some playback. It's not Aatami who traveled the road to revenge him but added a man this nameless officer sent to take him out. I go drag now the man who killed Aatami's family made a shovel for all his native grace road to revenge leaves make murder seem. Music just a little bit more than all the other killing broken into 5 chapters each size with the western theta humanized with Rowan use a rotary range carefully escalated atmospheric its note long after he load his vehicle with his symbol that drag now go catch up to the Atom army who are trained to protect his former home in Cho as the Soviet seek by the ground and air, but even also he moves from his set pieces to set pieces. It's defined by a different vehicle in many ways you can one. It's a Helander's grasp of the fundamental that make Royery Revengia such a bloody glide. The Oro Georgia Miller are apparent in Helander's over-utopimist letter laughter and narrative deficiency. They are also present in a cherry clarity of the Micah Osamasa cinematography which is an instant smiling inspired moment of natural grace. There is a B-coherence and a gravity to Road to Revenge's Carnegie which make the action more painful and dissatisfying. Behold Helander's a composition take on the Grimarso silent film thanks to the drama-suspend non-verbal performances and editing which has the crispness of a veteran stand-up crackling with the Sata pieces that the audiences can't wait to hear pay off. A late film sequence as abroad a Soviet train take a excellent advantage of a burying a sleeping soldier dosing and turning into their bunkia failing arms transferred into a humana security system. Madame B's a character Buster Cone as he advances through each a princess sequence as a even better Atomic Bug Bunny inspired a violence is rarely unearned making Ida even more satisfying than predecessor which will be a better suited for gift than films. A revenge made short a clear heightening of for moment. Music. To moment rather than magnified as a new landscape a new weapon or a tank outfitted with explosive uses to revenge is a simply more refined and enjoyable version of his predecessor or by showing what little form man on his initial idea craft an action movie but it is more with lost their moment Twina the sequel nearly overdoes it Twina Helander's thirst for blood threatens no power the film yet in the simplicity Ida finds a stage of their peakness gradually a peak and reset. It is not a profound or enlightening but for 89 minutes the Fury Road confidently flipping tank and unleashing hell along. There is both a coherence and gravity to Roy's carnage which make the action more painful and satisfying to behold. Aline's composition take on Grimarso silent film thanks to Tommila's paint non-verbal performances and violent editing which has the fashion stand-up clicking with a setup that the audiences can't wait to hear pay off in Sisu Road to Revenge. Jalmari Helander's violent sequel 2023 a Sony had to go at Scorpio more jam for the bloody road trip a flake they all learned skate effort to cultivate Aatami Korpi's next Johanna like a child in the kingdom who also right of sharing these toys, so his productions company Stage 6 screamed no mind who needs a blood when you have a man who refuses to die as your hero. I'm being fascist of course but not so much as you might think. The first time we met I told me he was just to leave his solitary life, he is walked by his side and riches in his still. He was content. Of course. As life would have it. There is often people who can't mind their own jam business. The people in this particular story just happened to be Nazis. Too bad for him. He was a man perceived as a lone and an all too easy target for a little did they know who J4. A good. If you have seen what Hada transpires, you know it did not end well of clicks in and if you thought that it would be the end of there you are not alone in thinking so. But here we are in 2025 and man damn it the Alana himself has returned for some much needed as a most brutal and discerning. Is a quite severed but a genuine German knife crossed. And who is dumb enough to ruin this man's day this time? The Soviet Union of course a commander of Red Army to the specific. What we discover in this is a man that is widely considered the person that created what would ultimately become the mate of the Mana who refuses to die by killing his entire family during water. An invincible fire was it within the army that will likely and never burn out. This release from prison Honda groans that he will finish the job. And Leonardo is a culprit of this man's greatest agony. But all Aatami want to dismantle the home he is firmly lived into and rebuild it elsewhere and to live via the rest of his life in peace. The Russian have a plan and they will wish they did not start out small. Our joy in the watches so to speak before diving all the way. Music. Inigo learns it quickly not everything changes the Mana does that does not speak has not grown any less formidable or any less cold-blooded after the initial reunion. Jagger opens to the float scared fasten wheel as a unit of armored motorcycle soldier will realizes virtually that a truck is very built a weapon as a piston is all and how you detail it. Then comes an attack from the air and for a time they get the better of him but he is never out of longer their past connect them out has been so will savor the thread with the extreme prejudice. This is a road to revenge. There's a lot of influences throughout his movie's DNA. Spaghetti western from Sulian and a resulting sequel of Johann Roba's Journey. Is a spiritual successor of Madame Max Bastard and perhaps most obvious a John Wick. It cars on the inspiration of these stories to build what is simply a premise but never lacking in intensity and pacing. This is pure fan service and so often this is seen in negative light. It's not what you might call a masterpiece, but it does exactly what you promised to do, and some either all right so in the sequel or for the world-thirsty action. For one I am trailer that see action Jalmari 2022 has found a sequels. This angel Maya surrender scared stoic silent action a hero a charming Korpi dispensed multiple fs in ways appropriate to this bigger budget, but instead of facing Nazis this term he is up against multiple goons from a Scalion's Russia. Brief prologue he explained how friend and hated Sisu landed the Soviet Union after World War II, unfortunately from Corp part of Thea, and lost in where his family lived before river. A brief prologue explained how Finland had to save land to his Soviet children after World War II. Unfortunately, Arbe part of the land lost in his family. Art lived before they were murdered by Loigo Dranova and a Red Army officer who won about a nurse with a shovel, and he chopped Thema into the little pieces. I tripped down memory land to reprocure a lorry load of wooden beams from his old home, so Korpi might build a new house within Funland new borders. A resulting attack now being instructed to hunt Hema down. Kill set pieces after set pieces of hugely entertaining music a ultra-violent mayhem with Korpi determined to get to the border with his beam. Bomb hell or high water. Not to mention bullets, bombs, missile, trucks, a tank, trains, planes and a plethora of human cannon forger. China fans understand that none of these violencia is meant to be taken seriously in real life. There is obviously no way Korpi could survive the intense level of brutality made out to him. In a particular nasty, needless to say, Korpi gives as good as he gets and tells Somia living up to the title. As before, the film informs us that Sisu is an unthrusted table finish that refers to striking detection and hisness in the face of the unpremeditated hardship. James Hare that Aatami Korpi giggling like a 12-year-old who would be snuck out into an age-destructive film. Speaking of which, this got passed by the British Border Film Classification video of 15 rather than an 18 certificate. Buta action span brief are the Samia, especially with thrilling sequences. This expertly choreographed, coming into a 2025 Sisu Road to Image was one of my most anticipated films of the year. I love the first Sisu, and judging by the trailer, it looked like the sequel would be just as good if not better. I'd promise to retain everything that made the original movie such a blast while also upping the end, and that was music to my ear. Music. I could not bear to see another bloody adventure with my favorite Finnish action hero, so when tickets went on sale I booked a seat for opening day as soon as I got to Jones. Sisu Road to Revenge was written and directed by Jerry Salinger and star Mana. Music. Laying a jet break in the film Korpi, the Finnish soldier who killed 100 of Russian combatants during World War II, has gone back into the Soviet try to reclaim the home he once knew. The land used to belong to Finland, but after the war that entire area was given it to Russia. Of course, the army does not want to live in the Soviet Union, so he dismantled the house, puts the logs on his truck and drives back to his home country. But along the way, he runs into some Russians who want him dead, and the only way to stop them is to kill Thema first. Right off the bat, I want to let you know that you don't need to see the original Sisu to watch Road to Revenge. This is standalone sequel in this vein of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom and Glass. Music, Onion. And ease out a mystery so it's equally accessible to the newcomer and Sisu fans alike. You just need to be a fan of great action. Music. And if you fit that bill, I think you're going to love this movie. Once the mayhem started to Revenge keep gives it on this cog until the credit began to roll. Sure, it stops to take a short bit every India, but you will never have to wait long for the pace to pick up again. At first the film is very reminiscent of the two best media, The Road Various and Fury Road. Pretty much the entire first half is just Aatami music, trying to drive back to Finland, so whenever the Russians go on the attack, you can't help but think of Max and Fury driving a big rig on a desert highway. Don't get me wrong, Road to Revenge does not quite reach the dead-defying height of those Stone Cold classic, but she's pretty damn good. seeing a charming thing fast and creatively right through his so stalkers in his thing of blood is beauty and a mean bloody, and when movie switches gear at around your midway point it does no to lose a single step. In particular the second half of this film really highlight the concept that gives the franchise its name. Sisu is a Finnish word that refer to an unbreakable greed intensity even in the face of seemingly impossibly obstacles, and Aatami is pretty much the living embodiment of that. I am not going to spoil anything, but I will say music. That if you think Johan Rambo is stitching himself up in First Blood is impressive, just wait till you see what Aatami does here. He exhibits an almost superhuman result, and Dr. Jorma brilliantly brings that unflinchingly determination to life with the body language and facial expression alone. Aatami has no dialogue in Road to Revenge. Lets you know he's not one to be trifled with. Music. So a single look from these guy is more than enough to put the fear of God into the anybody who gets in his way. Anybody that is, except the movie's a villainous officer named Igor Dranov. He's played by Seflang Laisa, just as good as his heroic counterpart. He amuses the character with the Samia kind of fearless that makes Aatami such a great protagonist. But he transforms into a much more sinister key. Everything the man says and does is dripping with the unwavering, so anybody can take Aatami being said. I don't want you to think if things so. Road Revenge is a pure shart of that line with no underlying substances, as the title suggests. This is a revenge film, but it's also more than that. Is a story of man who was deeply affected by the loss of Louis' life and the gears and Chmaunir's side of that character as well. When Aatami first returned home and memories of his family come floating back, is not afraid to let the character's emotions overwhelm him. He shows that even a man can try when he thinks back to the family that was so clearly ripped away from him. And as a man myself, I really appreciated that it's easy to view this franchise as little more than a hollow exercise in a beast brand out of fat toxic. But seeing it explains Genotion shows there is more to manhood than just a beer brawn and babies. On the flip side, I did have one issue with Sisu. A Road to Revenge. As much as I love the action, there are a couple of times when it switches the bones off. I can get into specifiers with how to spoiling some of the fun, but I can tell you what your worries offender involve as an airplane and few perfectly praise a dialogue. It's just too much to swallow even in a movie like this, so I wish. Writer directed Jalmari Helander, and he ended I did just an angel. Thankfully the god is good to say so roven for outweighed that one flaw, the excellent action and great character and surprising thematic substances make this film everything I was hoping for and even a little more. Granted it's not for everyone, but if bloody action cinema is your wheelhouse, I highly recommend that you check this movie out. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Mad Max Fury Road me? Music. A Fast and Furious franchise that my friend is stellar. Sisu, A Road to Revenge. If I had a week I could not tell you all of the ways Helander sequel goes balls through the wall of nearly every second of it runtime. To be fair, I would note I Want to Roven is one of those films that is absolutely essential to watch on the biggest screen possible with the largest crowd that you can find it the first time. Is good filing a charming copy and his journey to cash and gold through a Nazis occupied Finland. But it's no great, it delivered only brutality I'd promised. Music. But everything about it the first wished to be clear I enjoyed left me watching more. Road to Revenge is that more in some reason that you need to see it in the theater being that you deserve to hoot and holler at a second away. The fantastic has clawed the desert at me absolutely, and most anyone standing this way. There are at least 3 terma in my notes with about 15 underlines under him because the moment was so big. Appropriately, Road to Revenge his journey is little bit different than the first. Music. Films. It's more personal, which only make the violence all the more delightful, and The Road to Revenge takes place in 1946, 2 years after the events of the original Sisu. Aatami returns to the remains of his family home, the place where his loved ones were brutally murdered during World War II. The battle-hardened veteran quietly begins dismantling the ruined house, carefully stacking every piece of timber onto the back of his truck. His goal is simple but deeply personal: to transport the lumber back to Finland and rebuild a peaceful home where he and his loyal dog can finally live out the rest of their lives. However, peace is not so easily earned. Dragunov, the ruthless commander responsible for massacring Aatami's family, survived the war after being captured. He has never accepted the fact that Aatami has become a legendary figure, feared and admired across the land. Determined to erase that legend once and for all, Dragunov returns to finish what he started. The story is divided into 5 chapters, each delivering increasingly intense and unforgettable action. Every set piece is larger, bolder, and more visually spectacular than the last. Sisu, Road to Revenge builds upon everything that made the first film memorable. It raises the stakes, expands the action, and pushes Aatami's relentless determination to new heights as he hunts down the man responsible for destroying his family while eliminating anyone who stands in his way. What makes these action sequences so effective is how beautifully they're filmed. Many of the stunts are wildly over the top, yet they're choreographed with such confidence and precision that they're surprisingly believable within the film's world. With Aatami's resourcefulness, knowledge of physics, and unstoppable determination, you almost believe one man could pull off everything you see on screen. Although some viewers may still find it difficult to suspend their disbelief, the sequel isn't just bigger in terms of action, it also carries far more emotional weight. Jorma Tommila once again delivers a remarkable performance without speaking a single word. Just like in the original film, his silence says everything. This time, grief is just as powerful as his rage. In the first movie, Aatami fought to protect the gold he had discovered. Now, he's fighting to rebuild the life that war stole from him. After years of bloodshed and countless battles, Aatami is exhausted. He's no longer searching for glory or revenge alone. He simply wants a place where he can finally live in peace. That quiet longing is woven beautifully into the film, creating a moving contrast between heartbreaking sadness and explosive violence. A film like this demands an unforgettable musical score, and it absolutely delivers. Although the composer's name wasn't officially listed before the worldwide release on November 21st, the soundtrack elevates every scene. Whether during sweeping emotional moments or brutal action sequences, the music amplifies every emotion and transforms already spectacular scenes into unforgettable cinematic experiences. Without revealing spoilers, the ending of Sisu, Road to Revenge is one of its greatest achievements. Giving away even the smallest detail would ruin an experience that deserves to be seen firsthand. While the film is loud, brutal, and explosive throughout, its final moments are surprisingly emotional and provide the perfect conclusion to Aatami's journey across both films. For me, Sisu, Road to Revenge became an absolute favorite. Despite facing strong competition from other major action releases, it stands out as one of the year's finest films. It's bigger whenever it needs to be, yet knows exactly when to slow down for emotional impact. The performances are both intense and heartbreaking, and Jorma Tommila once again proves why Aatami is one of modern action cinema's most unforgettable heroes. Prepare yourself for an incredible ride. One of the biggest action surprises of recent years was 2022's Sisu, and its sequel, Sisu, Road to Revenge, appears to be even more successful. The film has earned outstanding scores on Rotten Tomatoes from both critics and audiences, proving that the franchise has only grown stronger. At a time when many action movies feel predictable and formulaic, Sisu stood apart by blending wartime survival, revenge, and relentless action into one unforgettable experience. It transformed an elderly prospector into one of the most unstoppable action heroes ever seen on screen. Both critics and audiences embraced the film, and it remained popular on streaming platforms long after its theatrical release. Now the sequel has arrived in theaters, earning praise that rivals and in some cases surpasses the original. Movie Web's own Julian Roman described it as the blood-soaked sequel fans have been waiting for, perfectly capturing the film's relentless energy. Against all expectations, it manages to live up to the enormous hype created by its predecessor. According to the official synopsis, Sisu, Road to Revenge follows Aatami as he returns to the home where his family was murdered during the war. Hoping to rebuild their house somewhere safe in their memory, he soon discovers that the Soviet commander responsible for the massacre has returned. Forced into another brutal conflict, Aatami embarks on the relentless cross-country pursuit packed with breathtaking chases, inventive action, and astonishing fight sequences. The film completely ignores the limits of physics in the most entertaining way possible. If you thought Mad Max pushed action to its limits, Sisu, Road to Revenge raises the bar even higher. The carnage is so outrageous that it makes many other action films seem almost restrained by comparison. Upon release, the sequel debuted with an impressive 95% critics score and a 90% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, both surpassing the original film. Many viewers have described it as Sisu meets Mad Max, Quentin Tarantino, and the Marvel Cinematic Universe, praising its willingness to embrace spectacular, over-the-top action without apology. Some reviewers even compared its outrageous set pieces to the infamous space sequence from the Fast Furious franchise, but agreed that Sisu fully embraces its absurdity, making every unbelievable moment incredibly entertaining. The original Sisu is currently available to stream for free on Tubi, making it the perfect time to experience Aatami's first adventure before watching the explosive sequel. There is currently no official streaming release date for Sisu, Road to Revenge, but one is expected to be announced in the coming months. Filmmaker Jean-Luc Godard famously said that all you need to make a movie is a girl and a gun. Director Jalmari Helander seems to disagree. In his world, all you really need is one unstoppable man, an enormous arsenal of weapons, and an endless supply of construction materials waiting to become deadly improvised tools. This sequel once again transforms Aatami into an unstoppable force of nature. In the original Sisu, audiences watched a lone gold prospector wage war against an entire Nazi battalion during the final days of World War II. Flashbacks revealed that he had previously become a legendary one-man army after the Soviet forces slaughtered his family. Now, the scarred warrior ventures deep into Soviet territory immediately after the war. His mission is deeply personal, returning to his old homestead before learning that Dragunov, the man responsible for his family's massacre, has escaped from a Siberian prison and is determined to erase Aatami forever. Driven by revenge and wounded pride, Dragunov gathers hundreds of heavily armed soldiers to hunt him down. But as history has already proven, sending an army after Aatami is rarely a good idea. Armed with little more than determination, extraordinary survival skills, and the ability to turn almost any object into a deadly weapon, Aatami once again proves why he remains one of the most unstoppable action heroes in modern cinema. Anyone can kill a man with a pencil, but it takes real creativity to destroy a tank with nothing more than a wooden plank. In this film, virtually every object inside it except perhaps the grass becomes a deadly weapon. Scrap metal, leftover war equipment, mining tools, and even the harsh environment are all transformed into instruments of destruction. Aatami is a master of using anything at his disposal, and despite barely speaking throughout the movie, his actions reveal everything you need to know about him. Jalmari Helander's filmmaking remains remarkably lean and focused. The movie spends only a few brief moments establishing the story before diving headfirst into relentless action. Even during the rare quiet moments, the audience is never allowed to relax for long. Aatami's only goal is simple: get his precious cargo home and survive. That straightforward mission tells us far more about his character than lengthy dialogue ever could. If you enjoyed the brutal action of the first Sisu, you can be certain there's even more bloodshed waiting in this explosive sequel. While many sequels simply repeat what made the original successful, Sisu, Road to Revenge refuses to play it safe. Instead of recycling the same formula, Helander raises the stakes with bigger action, more outrageous violence, and a surprising sense of humor. The once silent and intimidating Aatami evolves into an almost mythical action hero, taking on impossible odds with a level of creativity that borders on cartoonish in the best possible way. Of course, anyone expecting strict realism will struggle with this movie. During its over-the-top action scenes, logic is thrown out the window. The film proudly embraces its exaggerated style, delivering one jaw-dropping sequence after another without worrying about whether every moment is believable. And honestly, when the action is this entertaining, realism hardly matters. The story is divided into 6 chapters, a structure that occasionally interrupts the pacing just as the momentum builds. Fortunately, it doesn't take long before the film shifts into full action mode and never looks back. From that point onward, there's barely a moment to catch your breath. Helander delivers spectacular chase scenes that feel inspired by Mad Max and Crank, with each action sequence becoming larger, faster, and more intense than the last. Like its predecessor, the film remains dark, violent, and uncompromising, but this time it also embraces a much stronger comedic tone. Watching Aatami outsmart an army of ruthless enemies and a wildly unhinged officer pursuing him becomes as funny as it is thrilling. The exaggerated violence is intentionally absurd, turning every confrontation into a wildly entertaining spectacle, despite all the chaos. Sisu, Road to Revenge often feels like a modern silent film. Helander allows visual storytelling to carry the emotional weight, much like the classic works of Buster Keaton. Rather than relying on dialogue, the film communicates through expressive imagery, inventive action, and expertly choreographed set pieces. Cinematographer Josue's camera work is noticeably more polished and controlled than in the first film, giving every frame greater impact and cinematic style. Helander clearly understands that while Aatami's quest for revenge carries genuine emotional weight, everything surrounding that central story can be playful and wildly entertaining. The film fully embraces its unique tone, never hesitating to become ridiculous if it makes the action more exciting. The energetic camera movements, dynamic editing, and inventive choreography create an experience that's both exhilarating and surprisingly fun. This feels like Helander's most confident work to date. It's refreshing to see a filmmaker listen to criticism, refine his strengths, and push his creativity instead of simply repeating the first movie with a different villain. There's a genuine effort to evolve the series while still delivering everything fans loved about the original, only on a much larger scale. Leaning further into comedy proves to be one of the sequel's smartest decisions. The outrageous action scenes become increasingly cartoonish, leading to an unforgettable train set finale that initially seems completely ridiculous. Yet it's executed with such energy and confidence that it's impossible not to enjoy. The film expertly balances tension, action, and humor, creating a finale that's both thrilling and immensely satisfying. In the end, Sisu, Road to Revenge serves as a fitting conclusion to Aatami's brutal journey. After enduring unimaginable hardship and exacting his revenge, you can't help but hope he finally finds the peace he's been fighting for. It's an unapologetically over-the-top action spectacle and one of the most entertaining popcorn movies you'll experience. See a film that embraces its madness from beginning to end and delivers an unforgettable ride.